finally, graphs of cosecant and secant. And I've graphed on these, the thinner line, which is here, is the sine, right? Because the cosecant is 1 over the sine. So this wave is not the graphs, right? The graph are these big fat lines that look like U's, right? There's a U and there's a U and there's one opening down and there's another opening down, right? That's the graph of the cosecant, right? Couple things, right? Because it's 1 over the sine of x, the period is 2 pi, just like the sine, right? You could see that from 0 to 2 pi, it goes through one period, right? So the period is 2 pi. Second, because you're dividing by sine, it's going to have an asymptote wherever sine of x equals 0. And we know that sine equals 0 at 0, at pi over 2, or sorry, at pi, at 2 pi, etc. For every multiple of pi, you're going to have an asymptote. Okay, and same thing goes in the negative direction. Right? Because the sine is bounded by 1 and negative 1, the cosecant values, the lowest value they could have would be 1. And then when sine is less than 1, 1 over the sine is more than 1. That's why the graph goes up. Same thing when sine is negative 1, cosecant is negative 1. And when sine is between 0 and negative 1, then 1 over this sine is a negative number less than negative 1. When it comes to the secant, again, this thin line right there is the cosine. And since secant is 1 over the cosine, it has the same kind of relationship between those two as between the cosecant and the sine over here. Right, the period is still 2 pi. And wherever cosine x equals 0, there should be an asymptote. Cosine equals 0 at pi over 2, at 3 pi over 2, right? And every pi after that. You know, we could say it like x equals pi over 2 plus n pi. So every multiple of pi after pi over 2 and before pi over 2 for that matter. So that's all we're going to say about those functions, which leads to the homework. And the first page is all sines and cosines. It's going to be mostly a calculator activity. Set your window so that the x coordinates go between negative a period to positive a period. You know how to calculate that. And the y values should go from the minimum to the maximum. And you'll have to take into account the vertical shift and the amplitude for that. The second page is tangent, cotangent, secant, cosecant. And again, we'll use the same x coordinates, but for the y coordinates, go between -5 and 5 and include asymptotes on all of these graphs because they all have asymptotes.